Earlier this week saw Greater Manchester's 4th Green Summit, held at the Lowry Centre on Salford Quays, ahead of the COP26 meeting in Glasgow. Mayor Andy Burnham committed the region to shedding 1 million tonnes of carbon over the next 3 years. We spoke to Andy just after he had delivered the promise to the audience.
Everybody seems to think we're running out of time on climate. Are you confident that COP26 will be a success? And if so, what needs to happen to make it a success?
I can't say, as I stand here today with 2 weeks to go to COP, that I'm confident. Hopeful would be a better way of putting it, but also a little worried that the moment will be missed. You know, it's a big deal, the whole world coming here to hopefully accelerate progress to a net zero planet. My worry is if the government doesn't put up the investment in the spending review, which comes before COP on the 27th of October, we're going to look a little bit lost at COP because we won't have enough of credibility to say to the rest of the world. And it's really critical that cities are empowered as part of this. Cities will drive the change all around the world. And if English cities like Greater Manchester are not being backed, then I think the UK, we won't hit 2038 and the UK won't hit 2050. It's that serious now. We're kind of, the window is closing and we need to accelerate and do it right now. And the spending review will determine whether we can accelerate at the right speed. So yeah, there's a lot riding on the next 2 weeks.
Given the state of public finances though, given what's happened over the last 18 months with the pandemic, surely to put money into green investment means that something else has got to give?
Well, I see it slightly differently. You know, there's upfront costs from acting, but there are then benefits to UK PLC down the line from having changed people's homes so that they're cheaper to run, from lowering the cost of public transport, which actually gets more people into work. Because at the moment, the cost of transport here is so great that some people can't afford to travel out of the area where they live. So, you know, I think there's one way of looking at it, which is that it's all about cost. But what we need to look is the benefits that come from making that investment. For instance, if we are to move quickly now to change every home in Greater Manchester so that it's zero carbon, that can create 80,000 jobs, good jobs, for people of all ages, but particularly young people. And, you know, there's a big economic opportunity here. It might mean short-term costs, yes, but it's about investing to save later down the line.
Okay, and just quickly, you've announced that today that you're going to attempt to move 1 million tonnes of carbon out of the Greater Manchester City region over the next 3 years. Can you just say how you propose that's going to be done?
Well, it's got to be done by retrofitting homes. And so we have a plan to retrofit 12,000 homes in the next 3 years. We're already on with retrofitting schools and public buildings. But the big area where we can make change is on transport. Because I'm the only mayor in England outside of London that has taken the decision to put buses under public control, I'm in a unique position where I can decide what type of buses we have on our roads. And therefore, I can electrify the bus fleet more quickly than other places. And the vision here is to integrate buses and trams into a single system. I'm proud to say that our trams already run on renewable energy. That's a great story for Greater Manchester. But imagine if that was true of all of our buses as well. We would have the country's first fully integrated zero carbon public transport system in a way that London wouldn't be able to achieve because of the way the tube operates down there. So that is a fantastic vision for us. And it can be done. We are ready to deliver it if we get the right backing from the government. So, yeah, we can remove 1 million tonnes of carbon from the Greater Manchester economy. It delivers an acceleration of our progress towards 2038, which is, if I'm honest, is needed because at the moment we're not on course. And we hope the government will back us in the spending review.
Okay, thank you very much, Andy.
No worries. Thank you.
See you soon, mate. Yeah.
Cheers. Thanks.
We also took the opportunity to speak to other attendees. Ali Abbas is Greater Manchester's Friends of the Earth spokesman.
Hi there, I'm Ali Abbas. I'm a joint coordinator of Manchester Friends of the Earth.
Okay. So, Ali, we're here at the fourth Manchester Climate Change Summit. What have you made of it so far?
Well, I think that these events are always a great space to come and meet people who have got an interest in taking action on climate change and to hear a bit more about how things are going here in Greater Manchester. I guess, with these events, you might get a bit of a kind of glossy picture of the things that are happening. And I think in reality here in Greater Manchester, and to be honest, I think Andy Burnham was fairly open and honest about this, that we aren't doing enough yet. There's things going on, but not at the scale we need. So I think the real challenge is how we take the momentum that's started to build, but really accelerate that and do a lot more, a lot faster.
What have you made of the announcements so far today about, for example, cutting 1 million tonnes of carbon out of Greater Manchester for the next 3 years?
Yeah, again, I think a lot of this is dependent on government funding, so we need to hope that the government does really put its money where its mouth is and give places like Greater Manchester the funding to do this and the powers to do this. And it's the kind of direction we need to go in. To be honest, that 1 million tonnes is a start, but we need to do more than that as well. So, and it's something about, first of all, our politicians, our leaders, taking this seriously and leading from the front and making those difficult decisions about where we invest our money and what kind of programmes they put in place. But a lot of that also depends on national government, and that's where the focus needs to sit to a great extent as well. It's about what this government's going to do to enable local authorities, enable local people and local businesses to start making those rapid cuts in carbon emissions that we need.
One of the things that Andy Burnham said was about the government's commitment to paying for this sort of transition to a green economy. Given the state of the public finances after what's happened over the last 18 months, do you feel that other things would then have to give for that to happen?
I think clearly it's been an unusual 18 months, hasn't it, with a pandemic. But to be honest, if we don't act on climate change, the cost is going to be much more than if we spend some money now to deal with it. And if you look at the amount of money we're talking about spending, we've spent billions and billions through a pandemic. If we spent a fraction of that, we can make a real difference in terms of cutting carbon emissions. And by making those changes, by investing in things like insulating homes and in renewable energy, that's going to create jobs, it's going to boost the economy. It's going to be a win-win situation for people locally to be able to create local jobs. It's going to help cut carbon emissions, it's going to help make our homes warmer, and then that will help solve things like fuel poverty and all the health issues around cold and leaky homes. So, to me, it's not an either or. This is something that if we want to be successful in the future as a country, if we want to have decent jobs for people, if we want to have an environment that's going to protect us and is going to be livable in the future, especially for our children and future generations, then there isn't really a choice about this matter. We've got to invest that money now, and we'll be saving lots more in the future by doing that in the short term and by making those choices now.
Okay, what other things do you think Manchester could be doing that it's not doing at the moment?
Yeah, and clearly there's a real challenge with the context that we're in now. With had years of austerity from the government. It's still going on for local authorities, and local authorities are struggling to just do the basics. But in places like Manchester, there's a lot of things the council can do, and other councils across Greater Manchester can do. And part of that, I think, is how they can act as conveners and can bring people and organisations together and to collaborate and to work together on these solutions. Because in the end, the councils themselves have got a certain amount of influence, that a certain number of buildings that they own and manage, they've got certain levers they can pull, but they need everyone to get involved. And so there's something there about how councils can bring people together, provide people with the information they need and the support they need to do stuff, and make it more of something that it's about working with people rather than doing stuff for people. It's saying, here's some things that we can help you with. You come up with some ideas and we'll help to fund those and help to deliver those. So it becomes a collaborative exercise rather than it being a kind of top-down thing. I guess the other thing is just about showing this leadership about, when you have council leaders, as in Manchester City Council recently, the council leader said that he wanted to double passenger numbers at Manchester Airport. That clearly is going in the wrong direction when it comes to cutting carbon emissions. So we don't need leaders advocating for things that are going to make the problem worse. We need leaders to come out and say, this is what we're going to do, these are solutions we're going to take, and this is the direction of travel we need to go in, apart from the pun. But one of the examples of that is the Greater Manchester Pension Fund. So a lot of the local authorities in Greater Manchester, their staff their pensions are managed by the Greater Manchester Pension Fund. That's run by Tameside Council. That pension fund is still investing billions of pounds in fossil fuels. They're investing in these companies which are digging out the fossil fuels that we're burning to cause climate change. So that's completely crazy. Why are we investing in those companies and not in the companies which are delivering the solutions to climate change, like renewable energy, like green transport, etc., etc. So one thing that the pension fund could do today is to say, right, we're going to stop investing in these fossil fuel companies and start investing in the solutions. But we have found out just in the recent report that came out from the pension fund that they've actually increased the amount they're investing in fossil fuels. So that's going again in completely the wrong direction. So we need people like Andy Burnham to come out and say, this isn't appropriate, this isn't right. In Greater Manchester, this isn't where we want to be. We want to be cutting carbon emissions. It's not appropriate for us to be investing in fossil fuel companies. And our pension fund should come out of that today. And that's what true leadership's about. It's saying that when we're doing the wrong thing, we stop that and we do it straight away. And then we start investing in the future.
Okay. I'm glad you brought up, my next question was going to be about the airport. I mean, I haven't heard any mention today of aviation or Manchester Airport. I might be wrong in that. What's your opinion on that, and how does that fit into Manchester's future climate strategy?
That's a really good question. I think that's the question that never gets discussed. It's one of those ones, it's that white elephant in the room, which, whenever the airport's mentioned, everything goes quiet and you move on to the next question. And I think right now the strategy is officially to double passenger numbers at the airport.
Okay.
And that means increasing emissions, which is something we can't do. We know every sector has to reduce emissions, and aviation has to be part of that.
Yeah.
I think part of the challenge is that the councils in Greater Manchester part own Manchester Airport Group, which run Manchester and East Midlands and Stansted airports. So they've got a financial stake in that organisation, and they get some dividends. Well, in good years, clearly the last couple of years it's been quite challenging for the aviation industry, but prior to that they've been getting dividends from the airport to help make up some of the shortfalls in funding from the government. So clearly there's a conflict of interest there, but if we're serious about tackling climate change, we can't pretend that we can carry on growing the airport. That just makes no sense at all. And that's the kind of thing which just gives our leaders a bad name, because if they're standing up saying that at the same time as saying they want to cut carbon emissions, people will just think that they're not serious. And that's the last thing we need, is to cast that leadership into doubt. So we need leaders to be honest about it and say, yes, we have an airport. Yes, we part own that airport, but we recognise that the airport can't continue growing. In a climate emergency, at the very least, we have to cap emissions at that airport, say they can't grow beyond 2018 levels before the pandemic. That's a cap. After that, then if there is improvement in efficiency of technology in planes, or if there are ways that are guaranteed to improve the emissions from aviation, then once that happens, we might be able to consider starting to grow flights. But really, if we can make savings in aviation, shouldn't we be spending that carbon somewhere else? So is it better to say that we can actually maybe provide a bit more space for people to keep their gas boilers a little bit longer because they can't afford to switch it out to a heat pump, rather than saying we can let some rich people fly a bit more? So that's the choice we can make about saying, let's have a cap on emissions. If we start then making savings from aviation, we can then choose where to spend that carbon. And on average, that's not going to be on allowing more rich people to fly more.
Okay.
So to me, that's a choice we can make.
Okay. Going to the sort of more general picture, how optimistic are you about COP26?
So COP26 is one of these conferences where countries get together and try and hammer out agreements on climate change. And in the past, there's been a few minor successes, I would say. Things like the Paris Agreement, which came out and set an ambition to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees warming, which is kind of the safe level for a lot of countries around the world. In reality, it feels like that the talks in Glasgow probably won't achieve all that much. We need them to, but it doesn't really feel that this government or other governments are in a place where they really want to take this seriously.
Okay.
There's lots of good talk, but very little action. And I think for the UK, we have a real opportunity in hosting these talks to really put in place some policies that would really tackle this challenge and tackle the climate emergency. The government's failed to do that. In fact, the government's still wanting to invest more in more fossil fuels. So, there's a application in for a coal mine in Cumbria that the government hasn't ruled out yet. There's an application in for some more oil drilling up in Cambo and at Shetland Islands. And again, that's something the government hasn't ruled out yet. There's still another application in for some extraction of fossil fuels down in the southeast of England as well. So what we need to start with before we go into the solution to climate change is, again, stop digging fossil fuels out of the ground. So that's the very first thing the government should be doing. And then secondly, there's no coherent strategy really around climate change. There's bits of funding here and there. And we've
That's
heard
in the UK or
in the UK, I'm talking about start with. But
yeah.
there has been a few bits of funding here and there, and we heard a bit about that this morning about the public sector decarbonisation scheme, and some of the funding's come to Greater Manchester, which is good. But it's small bits of funding, and it's very short term and a small scale. And what we need is something which is a much more coherent long-term strategy about how we're going to solve these problems. Well, the government's looking at all those issues and is still, is talking the talk but not delivering. And for us to go into a major summit in that situation doesn't fill me with a lot of hope that the government will be able to broker a deal, the deal that we need, and encourage other countries to sign up to the level of action that we need.
Okay, so if Glasgow doesn't do anything, where does that leave the world going forward?
International agreements are important, but equally we don't have to wait for those to act. So, right now in this country there's stuff happening and we can accelerate that. So the government can decide to do more, and it can choose to focus its spending on the right things. I mean, there's a budget coming up, there's a comprehensive spending review coming up soon, and the Chancellor in those announcements could quite clearly put a plan in place and funding in place to deliver some of this change that we need. So it doesn't need international action for that to happen. Clearly, if we get international agreements, that helps because it encourages other countries to act as well. But it's not all gloomy, because there are a lot of countries who are starting to take this seriously. And we've seen in places like America changes in leadership, where they've got Joe Biden now, who, whatever you say of Trump, Joe Biden is definitely an upgrade. And I think it's probably not too hard, is it really? But he's come up with these plans for much more ambitious action on climate change in America. And we've seen China saying they're not going to fund coal plants overseas now. So again, there's changes there happening. We just need to accelerate all this good stuff that's happening, and make sure we don't get fall into a trap of those kind of short-term excuses for not taking action. The excuse is that we haven't got the funding available. Well, the funding is available if you want it to be there. So make those choices, make it happen, and let's take advantage of those opportunities.
Hello, so I'm with Zamzam Ibrahim, who is the Vice President of the European Students' Union. But her journey began in Bolton as a child of Somali refugees. Zamzam, tell us about your climate journey to get to where you are today.
Thank you so much. So I guess my journey began very much as a young activist that saw issues in our society and didn't see the change that I wanted to see in our communities. And as a young person, I guess I started asking a lot of questions as to who is going to implement this change and how this change is going to come about. And as you said, I'm the daughter of Somali refugees. My parents gave up everything for their own safety and security. And so I wasn't raised in the most easiest of ways. But I do know what it is like from what I've seen from my parents, to leave behind everything, and start fresh. And actually, as we talk about the issues that we face in the climate crisis, right? It is quite literally we're walking towards a crisis of leaving behind our very own safety and security here. And to me, it's an issue that needs to be tackled collectively as a community. Often when governments talk about the climate crisis, they do it through a very lens of mitigating small issues, but actually not really addressing the nail on the head. And I honestly think if one place, if anywhere, is going to really be bold and visionary, it's Manchester. Because we understand the importance of coming together. We understand the importance of being collective in our vision and in our work. Because the climate crisis is quite literally right now displacing people as we speak. Mm-hmm. There are people's lives being lost. This isn't a conversation of small changes happening and implementing. There are quite literally lives at stake. And so I believe myself, as a part of a collective community, play a very pivotal part in changing the course in which we're heading towards, because it isn't just a detriment to myself, it's a detriment to you and to everybody else that's listening.
Okay. When did you first become aware of the climate issue?
I was always aware of the climate issue, but I'll be honest, I didn't always think it was my fight or my campaign to run.
Okay. And
I'll tell you why, because the reality is, the way the climate crisis has been framed for decades, it is very much a middle-class, white, environmentalist agenda. And that's because the people that were putting together these campaigns and running these big international NGOs were very much rich white environmentalists, you know? And so the conversations were about saving polar bears, they were about, they weren't necessarily about they weren't human-centered.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't talk about the effects that it had on us as individuals. And so for me, when I decided to do something about it was when I was actually the president of the National Union of Students, the vice president, sorry, of the National Union of Students in the UK.
This was at Salford
This was at a national level.
Okay.
And I realized I had a platform then because I was working with the sustainability department to really reframe and redefine sustainability, to redefine environmentalism to something that was actually important, meaningful and impactful. And that's really when my journey began.
Okay. Tell us about some of the things that you did then. What were some of the campaigns that you ran when you were president of the Students' Union?
So we ran a campaign around tackling inequalities in environmental NGOs directly. So it was actually understanding and reframing what environmental injustices existed. And then we also did a campaign on campuses on responsible futures. We ran campaigns on campuses around recycling, reusing, and the role that students play in building and rebuilding their local community. We wrote the first ever environmental bill by students, Teach the Future campaign that now is increasingly growing and that's actually moved towards international levels, which is a campaign that's quite literally asking for our education systems to embody and teach us about the impacts of the climate and the role that we play in averting it. And so there are tons of work that the organisation SOS UK, that was a co-founder of, have been doing with climate activists across the sphere. And the most important thing to SOS UK has always been and will always continue to be putting students and young people at the very forefront of this fight, of this conversation, and for them to truly lead the way.
Okay. What are your hopes or fears for COP26?
I mean, I like to always remain hopeful that better days are to come.
Yeah.
But I think we have to be very honest, right? We have to be brutally honest with the reality of we haven't met the targets that we need to meet. We haven't been even a fraction of as visionary and aspirational as we should have been. And I'm really hoping that when we come together in Glasgow in literally just a couple of weeks, that there is a huge wake-up call, the wake-up call that we really need to see, because if we don't, we've quite literally failed ourselves and all of humanity.
We have had these wake-up calls before. There's been various other climate summits and very little appears to have come out of them. So what needs to be different in this one in Glasgow?
I mean, I think the reality is, it is very much I think the difference is, like, we've just come out of a pandemic, right? We've seen a crisis at first hand. And actually, debatably, we haven't probably come out of the pandemic, right? We're still very much in it. But the reality is, right, like, we've seen firsthand what a crisis looks like and how it plays out. And so, actually, I think...
So we're recording an interview here, so...
Actually, I think the reality is that because of the pandemic, I'm hoping that we as a nation have a very different mentality and understanding of what a crisis is and how it looks like. And understanding and framing that this pandemic is only a small, minute fraction of what's to come if we don't avert the climate disaster.
Okay. Zamzam, thank you very much for your time.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much.